Vayigash elav Yehuda. Then Judah, the Torah translates, went up to him. This week's Parsha, Vayigash, opens with one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Torah. Judah approaches Joseph, though he doesn't yet know. It's like a telenovela, okay? If you were into telenovelas when you were growing up, well, if you were growing up in Argentina and there was nothing else to watch, then you were into telenovelas when you were growing up, and they were all from Mexico. Anyway, so, what? There you go. So this is a moment of, there's about to be a revelation. This is dramatic. I don't want to actually deal with the drama, but if you don't know it, you need to know. This is one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Torah. Joseph, the lost brother, is a kind of a prince in Egypt. Now the siblings are coming. I just want you to be aware. We're so few. So if you have any side conversation, I actually hear what you are saying, and I'm listening to you. So you need to be very mindful of that. Your choice. I will need to stop. I just can't keep going. So this is it. It's one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Torah. The siblings don't know that Joseph is now a prince. Joseph is hiding. And now Joseph is accusing them of a crime they didn't commit. And Judah approaches Joseph and pleads for the release of Benjamin. But what stands out of this moment isn't just that Judah, in an heroic act, steps forward. It's how he steps forward. His approach doesn't just change the outcome. It reflects a personal transformation that Judah himself has experienced. The Hebrew word for Vayigash means approach, and he approached. But it isn't just about moving closer, kind of a physical act. Judah's approach represents a shift in character. Earlier in the story of these siblings, Judah failed to stand up for Joseph. Now, he steps up for Benjamin. It's a transformation not just of a position, but of methodology. The word methodology is an important one, a very important one, because Vayigash, the word gisha in Hebrew, is literally methodology. Judah doesn't hesitate to lead with vulnerability, responsibility, and connection. And that change in the approach, the ability to reframe, adapt, to grow, is what ultimately opens the door for the reconciliation of these siblings. The power of the approach of Vayigash is always present as a possibility, but too often it is lost in the default of patterns of our mindsets or the illusions we create in order to control our personal narratives. We think we have no options. We have very often a single approach for every single situation in our lives. A striking example of the power of the approach appears in the Hanukkah, in the liturgy of Hanukkah that we just celebrated a week ago. And it's represented in one single word. In the blessing we recite after meals in Birkat HaMazon, and in the addition, in the section of Odaya, in the Amidah of gratitude, in the central prayer of our service, appears this word. There is a sequence of words acknowledging miracles. Al Anissim, Ve'al Purkan, have you sung them? Ala nisim be'ala purkan be'ala shuot be'ala ot she'asita. You say the word. Now, you say the word, Cantor. The word that I needed was milchamot. It's one word. You will see something very interesting. Sephardic Jews use the word be'ala niflaot that you have made for our parents. And Ashkenazi Jews say niflaot means wonders. Wonders, I'm going to hold back with the Ashkenazim. I'm going to tell you. And the Ashkenazim say milchamot, and for the wars that you made for our forefathers. Now, if you try to distinguish the word wonders, it's a beyond grasp divine realm, or in other words, a beyond our reach and above our heads approach. These wonders that were made for us. Now, on the other hand, the word milchamot is a painful, tangible, down-to-earth, human responsibility and participation-based approach. However, while focusing on this second approach, one could and should ask, why do we talk about the milchamot? Why do we put the emphasis on the milchamot, on the wars, on the battles, if we could actually say on the nitzchonot, on the winnings, on our victories? The entire story of Hanukkah is that we were victorious. And maybe, and now that Hanukkah has passed, I'm willing to tell you this, maybe it's because we actually didn't win the war. We didn't win the war. We won a battle. We reclaimed the temple, but the broader struggle, the ideological and the cultural one, that tension never fully ended. Let's pause and think for a second about this. Do you like sports? Are you a fan of any sport team? Okay, cool. Do you send your children to school? Go to a secular school? To learn math and chemistry and all those things. Do you think that getting a college education is a good idea? So the Greeks won. That's what the Greeks wanted. The cultural war was a total takeover by the Greeks. We all are Hellenized in our approach to life. Now, if we put the entire thing on these specific things, then we are a lost cause. On the other hand, if we say that the war was actually about identity, and these things are not necessarily descriptive of our identities, but they are important things that we want to have as part of our culture/identities, then there is a chance for us to reclaim and say, well, we actually won a battle, and yes, we adopted these things from Greek culture. Now, the problem with identity is that it isn't something you can win on one decisive moment, even in a glorious one. It's not a box you check off and move on. It's ongoing, and that seems to be something that our rabbis knew when planting the word milchamot. In those days, by Amim Aem, and maybe more importantly, and something that we could extremely benefit from internalizing, Basman Aseh, in our days, in these days. Professor James Cars explains this beautifully when he describes two kinds of games, finite and infinite games. Finite games like basketball, have fixed rules, set players, and clear winners and losers. Infinite games, like life, wisdom, and identity, have changing rules, unknown players, and no end point. The goal isn't to win. The goal, my friends, is to keep playing, to keep learning, and to keep growing. And yet, so often, we approach infinite games with a finite mindset. We act as if careers, relationships, and even health are things we can win. But treating infinite games like finite ones creates burnout. It sets us up for frustration because we are trying to finish something that's not meant to end. Simon Sinek points out that when we approach infinite games with a finite mindset, we see trust, cooperation, and innovation decline. Over time, we run out of the will or the resources to keep going. So what's the alternative to a finite approach? What does it take to shift it? It takes having the courage to trade probability by possibility. It takes the breadth of seeing in our lives as journeys and not as checklists. It means accepting that there are no winners in marriage, parenting, careers, or democracy. Because to keep playing is the goal and not winning them. These are all infinite games. This concept is especially relevant when we reflect on transitions of power here in the US. Whether we are happy or disappointed by the election's result, the question is, what happens the next day? Do we declare game over? That mentality, the game over mindset, is, in my opinion, what fueled the January 6th insurrection. People believed that there was nothing left to lose. But democracy, like identity, is an infinite game. It requires us to keep showing up, to keep struggling, and by means of doing that, to keep growing. That's why the Hanukkah liturgy emphasizes milchamot, battles, and not victories. It reminds us that some struggles, such as the one of building a particular identity in a diverse world, aren't meant to end. On the contrary, they are meant to be an ongoing tension that shapes us. To live with those milchamot, tensions, is what gives us the elasticity to rise to the level of our circumstances, to find or at least to aim for the right approach, Basman Aseh, in this time, in our lives. And of course, not all battles are meant to be in perpetuity. There are wars, like the one in Gaza today, that must end with a ceasefire and the release of all hostages, God willing. But what also needs to end is the conception, the misconception that is spoken by Israeli politicians of the absolute victory. True for this war and for many other conflicts, there is a deeply flawed approach that argues that ongoing struggles can be defeated on one battle. Win and be done. That approach most often undermines the root cause of the conflicts that we are dealing with. And it aims to end by winning, but ultimately leads to burnout, loss, and corruption. We have 454 days of war since October 7th that tragically prove that. An alternative could be to stop thinking about the war as a soccer game, in which we keep a scoreboard and instead approach it as a time of expressing our social aspirations, a time to focus on building social trust, considering, for example, that in Israel, the numbers of government and even army approval, which is a very unusual thing. Usually the army has a very high level of approval in Israel, and the chief of the army particularly, not the case right now, is in a historical low of 48%, something like that. It's very, very low. Are in a historical, the two of them, government approval and army approval and trust are in a very, 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 very low rate. As it turns out, playing to win really doesn't help when what we actually need to be doing is to play to build. Now back to the sphere of our personal lives. If we manage to internalize that there might be places in which we have the power of the approach, meaning the power of transforming situations and our life experiences, being able to find the right allocation, the fine-tuning place for our actions, and by means of doing that, find out what the circumstances that we are dealing with really require. Then we will stop burning out, and instead, we will be very likely building strength. Judah's story, in this Torah portion, Parashat Vayigash, shows us this very simple but important concept. He doesn't give up. True on Benjamin, but first and foremost, he doesn't give up on his own capacity to grow and to rise to a higher level of decency. His previous experiences and bitterness now become steps on a path that led to this moment, not one of culmination, as decency is an infinite game, but one of profound connection and healing. And so, I want to wish to all of us, for this Shabbat of Parashat Vayigash, the Shabbat of the power of the approach, to help us identify the places we have defined as game over in our lives. May this Shabbat give us the courage to examine our scars and burnout, and remind us that we can grow, that we can continue playing, and that we too have the ability to heal. Because as Judah and anyone else, we have the power of the approach, and that power can change it all. Shabbat Shalom.